you?
I am not bad today. Like, what first full day of spring? The news was calling it the first full day of spring. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we had tree planting in my neighborhood today.
Oh, that was amazing.
Yeah.
I'm actually impressed with the amount of like tree planting going on across the city.
Yeah, ours has been like a 2-year project. So we have like Violetville always had tons of trees, and so
Oh wow.
we lost a lot with the ash trees. So now we have a bunch of new baby trees.
Yeah. I know, like in the Northeast, like when we had some high winds like last year, there were a lot of trees that were like taken out, and so I noticed they've been marking trees that need to be removed and like starting to plant some additional ones. So.
Well, come to find out, getting a tree planting with like Blue Water Baltimore is the quickest way to get those trees removed too.
Huh. Good to know. I just think trees are just a really wonderful part of communities. I think we're waiting on Commissioner Coy and Commissioner Kat Zotby. And so if we could just allow a little bit of extra time, everybody, that would be great. I just want to make sure everybody's here. Actually, I need a caucus quorum.
Were you saying if you're wondering if I was here?
Oh, yeah, I didn't know you were here.
Quietly here.
Quietly, that's
That's unusual, right? I usually have something to say.
Tanisha, would you mind checking in with Commissioner Katzotby to see if he plans to attend, and we can infuse him in once he arrives. Or / have you heard from him today?
No, I have not heard, but I did reach out.
Okay.
As soon, I know he usually jumps in when he's when he gets in. But if I hear something, I'll let you know.
Well,
okay.
Sally,
The reason why I asked.
Oh, go for it. Sorry.
The reason why I ask is that like we're covering student organizations as a policy today, and I'd like to make sure that he has an opportunity to weigh in. I mean, both of the two agenda items are pretty meaty and weighty, but like especially with that one, I want to make sure he has an opportunity. So if it is not of huge concern to the staff, like maybe we can resequence just a little bit. Maybe we can cover compliance reports first, and then looking at policy FCA for closing of schools, and then student organizations next. And I'm sorry, Commissioner Coy, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to.
No, you were saying that was exactly the sort of thought process. So we're on the exact same wavelength.
Awesome.
Hi, Josh Sivan, Chief Legal Officer. I'm the designee today. I just wanted to make sure that I see Angela Alvarez on here, and if Angela is ready to go on her FCA, maybe we go first with FCA.
You want to do FCA first?
If Angela's ready, Angela.
Yes, I'm ready, but I thought maybe Commissioner Sally was saying that order because the student commissioner, I know, had a lot of questions. So I'm just going to be respectful of that.
To participate in the process as much as possible. I think both of the subjects are ones that like would be a great opportunity for him to weigh in on. Tanisha, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. So he did respond. He his school day is a little longer on Tuesdays, but he is almost where he is, going to, so he can get on these. So he's close. So we don't need much time. So he is close. He will be joining us very soon.
So would it be okay if we do compliance reports first, then and then FCA, and then I appreciate that very much. So in the University of Just Welcoming, I'm just glad and grateful for everybody joining this afternoon. I know our agenda has some topics in it that are really important, as they all are. Today's might be a little bit more thorough, so we may need to ensure that we have enough time for discussion with both a presentation and discussion with staff. We may limit our questions to about 3 to 4 per commissioner. If you have additional questions beyond that, I do suggest and recommend that you do reach out to staff to make sure that they can cover the in-depth part of that. But I just want to make sure that we have enough time for that. Not shortchanging public comment this afternoon, because that's really important and critical. And I think that's the universe. And then I see a hand from Haley. Make sure I cover hand.
Yes. Just quick Commissioner Katzogby just reached out to me and said that he's on the bus. He'll be at North Avenue soon, and he's hoping to find a device. Ms. Moore, I asked him to reach out to you about that to be able to join for this committee meeting from North Ave.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Haley. I
Mhm.
appreciate it. All right. All right. So why don't we get started with the compliance reports that we have on the docket today. So I just want to make sure that the very first one is ACE. This is 3.01 on the agenda. So service animals. Were there any questions from my board colleagues regarding this particular compliance report? It's a very short and punctual one. One question I did have, just to make sure I understood, is this specifically looked like we did. Oops. Sorry, let me make sure I click on the right one. Service animals. For service animals and the compliance report, we see zeros across the board. Is that because, is this typical of an annual year? Or is this atypical? Is this because we're just getting back into school full time in the past year? Would we normally see more requests for accommodations for service animals? This is, I believe, Dr. Dabrowski, Chief Dabrowski.
Yes, and I was looking for somebody from academics to chime in just because of the time change. But would it be okay? Would it be okay, Commissioner Sally, if there's nobody immediately available, that we take that as a follow-up and get back to you on that piece?
Absolutely fine. Yeah, that's just helpful. But thank you so much for that. Okay, and our second compliance report this afternoon is BLA. This one's appeals and hearings. So this annual report requires just the CEO and the board shall provide a report on the number of appeals filed across the system the past year. So to make sure my board colleagues may have any questions regarding the contents of that. Commissioner Boyd.
Yeah, so in the appeals and hearing, one of the things that it highlights is the average length of time between sort of the appeal being filed and the hearing held. And the date that I'm seeing in the report is 189 days from that. Now, there are other ones that have a much shorter time frame within that, but I'm just calling attention to that and wanting a little bit additional context to understand how that duration of time compares to what is reasonable to expect, and that just more context around that. It seems long.
Oh, yeah, sure. Thank you so much for the question. So that is in response to board policy BLB, which are hearings that are held pursuant to 6202. And with that is our population of teachers and certificated employees. In the policy, and as you know, it comes from law, the hearing cannot be held 60 days. So we have a 60-day time frame in the beginning of the hearing being held. And then once parties agree on a hearing date, we do have to agree on the hearing date. Once we agree on the hearing date, the hearing examiner then has 30 days after that to provide a recommendation. And then there is time for exceptions to be filed and times for response to those exceptions. BLB is one of the process that does take longer, and it is to give both sides an opportunity to be able to fully participate in the appeals process. And because it is our certificated employees, this is also the category of employees that the board the recommendation is actually comes to the board from the CEO to for the disciplinary action, where the other appeals are as a result of the CEO's decision. This matter is just a recommendation to the board of a disciplinary decision. So having the extra time is actually is needed, and it is, and we are following pursuant to the law. So that's why that one is a little longer.
No, and that additional context is appreciated and understood. I mean, obviously, the nature of the items that are being appealed are such that that time is needed and beneficial. But knowing some of those mandated wait periods, if you will,
Yes.
Is a helpful context that I appreciate.
Sure, no problem. Thank you for the question.
And I just want to clarify something I brought up in the beginning. So like there are 3 compliance reports here. So we're looking at policies BLA, BLB, and BLC. So like there are 3 here. So
Yes. I'm sorry, my camera was off. I apologize.
it's okay. No, I was the one who made the error here. So just want to make sure it's very clear. Commissioner Esposito, did you have any questions regarding any of the 3 that are here? 4 that are here, BLA?
No,
Yeah. Got it. I don't have any questions today for us either. Okay. So it's pretty simple today on the compliance reports. So if we can shift in the agenda to looking at our first item, so policy FCA, which is closing of schools. And I can turn it to Angela Alvarez to take us through this.
All right. Hello, everyone. So I'm Angela Alvarez. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of New Initiatives. And I'm going to be presenting some proposed revisions to policy FCA and its reg FCA RA, which is our policy that governs our process for permanent school closures. This policy aligns to board priority 3, 4, 5, and 7. It connects to our goal of making sure all of our students are in high quality, modernized facilities, and they have the resources that are needed to support success. It involves all of our stakeholders, so making sure that we're effectively engaging stakeholders in this process is important. It connects to providing equal access to district services, resources, and facilities to ensure the success of our students and staff. We have been aligning it to, and our equity policy sort of governs the work of it. We had 4 goals with these proposed revisions: to codify the process for surplusing district facilities not tied to school closure, incorporate and codify best practices that are part of the work and that we've learned from others who do this work, to align the policy to our ADA equity and the recent revisions to KCA, which are family and community engagement policy, as well as to modernize any outdated elements that were left in the So as you know, when we propose closures, they come about as part of our annual review process, which is where we make recommendations, a number of different kinds of recommendations, but can include school closures. So, but their recommendations around, they could be to relocate a school facility, change grade configuration, surplus the building, operator renewal is part of that, and school closure. In that process, our tenets are, our goal is to ensure that all students, we're trying to improve our schools so that all of our students have access to rigorous, robust academic programs and safe and healthy environments. And the process is a huge process. It's multi-layered and includes a lot of different people, a lot of different departments. There are specific legal requirements too that have an impact on the timeline. And there's a need for consistent, timely engagement of a variety and a broad set of people, including community people and school-based people. It starts with preparing for that public process, which includes a lot of written communications and setting up meetings and attending meetings that also require detailed materials and time. Once recommendations are announced, it kicks off a series of meetings with lots of stakeholders here, like key departments that need to be notified, elected and city officials, the school leaders themselves, staff at the schools proposed for changes, parents and families, and then there's hearings and steering committee meetings. So there's a host of meetings that are part of the legal process. And then if approved, over the next couple of years, there's transition work that begins. And it starts with the formation of a transition committee and includes ongoing meetings with the community and other offices to push in and to ensure our investments and things are taking hold within these school communities when we're combining them. We try to make sure that all of the materials that govern the process are available both in English and Spanish and are posted on our website. So this is like a snapshot from this year until you'll see we post all the letters, we post all the reports obviously, and the details around public comments, just making sure those things are posted. So, a small snippet of an example of some of the materials that are required and how we make sure the public can access these materials beyond some of the other ways that we send it out to schools. We have guiding principles for annual review. One is around continuous improvement. And so just really kind of checking and making sure that schools are improving over time. We believe that every student in our city deserves to be in a high quality to have a high quality education and receive that in a healthy facility that supports teaching and learning. We believe that communities that have experienced the most disinvestment and have the most need should be the first communities that we're actually investing in. And we believe the historical context and current political realities impact our school communities, and we need to be cognizant of that in any of these recommendations that come about, and that we should only propose changes, especially something as significant as a closure, if there are certain preconditions that exist that help us to believe that we'll be able to improve the quality of education for students, and that these will be realized within the school community, particularly for those impacted immediately by the change. And so making sure there's strong leadership in place. The facility not only has capacity for more students, but can be improved or is already at that place, like in case of like making 21st century or more recently renovated school facilities available to students, that they're strong partners, and there's a real alignment of resources that come into play in this process. There's a lot of questions about the impact of closure. So in terms of research, national research on school closure is mixed. Studies consistently indicate that the quality of the receiving school really matters for student outcomes. I talked about how the studies are mixed, so some can show very little lasting impact on students. Some show negative impacts on student experience with closure, and others show lasting positive impacts. What makes a difference there again is the quality of the receiving school that's identified for students. Research also shows that districts that focus on growth and other measures of school quality and in identifying and understanding receiving schools, so not just being reliant on test scores, are more likely to see lasting positive impacts on students, and that the strategy and set of interventions also matter when making school closure decisions, including in the designation of receiving schools. In Baltimore, what we have seen is that, well, one, we're often selecting the higher performing school or the stronger school leader as the receiving school. In our schools that have gone through these changes, since 1819, we've seen the enrollment increase at the receiving schools in alignment with families actually choosing, majority of families choosing to go to the school that we've designated the receivers. And then these schools have been able to offer more robust offerings to students. And we'll look at what that means in schools in a minute. These schools have also been able to strategically staff their schools in ways they were not able to do before. And that includes things like adding APs, adding coaches, and taking on certain initiatives that they couldn't afford to do at the sizes they were previously. School leaders also report increased opportunity for teacher collaboration and a renewed focus on academics in newly merged schools. And then we've also been able to, with the leadership of Dr. Washington and Cindy Smith, provide real concrete facilities improvements in schools in a way that's felt by the school community, known by the school community, as well as with the help of partners, with the leadership of our chief of staff and her team within those schools, and other partners that have come forward to help us bring other kinds of investments. This is an example of what our transition, this is like from what we're doing currently. This is kind of very recent, but this is an example of what the transition work looks like in practice. So you can see us here in this picture, we're doing a community walk with school staff, families, students, and DOT to understand walk paths that informs requests of rulemaking of DOT to make sure new walk paths are safe for students as they change. Excuse me. This is images from a recent event. We're invited. It was held at Franklin Square, Stewart Hill families to come and to be able to tour the building, and for students to be able to have fun and get to know each other together. We were lucky a partner was able to connect us with TikTok sensation TSU Terry, who's here, who taught the students and the school leaders dances. And so you see them all having a good time. We had a DJ, Pork Chop, who's well known in Baltimore, present for that. And we had games and art that students participated in. You'll see some of the art in later images in the slide. This here, example of investments, are images of our students from Stewart Hill, both Stewart Hill and Franklin Square students and families participated in this, providing feedback because we're getting a new Kaboom playground at Franklin Square. And so the school community helps design what that playground looks like. And so these are students actually drawing what they want in the playground. So we're heavy in that process. In terms of preparing for this policy, we've been engaging in a lot of feedback sessions. It started early. The first group to give us feedback was actually PCAB's policy committee last May. And then we have also been engaging other districts and researchers on school closure, get feedback from them and learn from their practices. We've also had the board go visit schools that have gone through changes or are about to go through changes so they can see, what's happened and have discussions with school leaders. So that happened between January and February. We've been conducting empathy interviews. So we've been talking to parents, students, school-based staff, school leaders, and community partners who've experienced these transitions to get their feedback on the process. And so we'll be sharing that. And we're going to continue to do that through next month. And then we will be going to our organizations to get feedback from them, starting this month with CCAC. Next month, we'll be getting feedback from our Charter and Operator-led Schools Advisory Board, PCAB, and ASCBC. And we've also been getting feedback from central office staff, particularly those that support this work, to help inform the policy. So what have we learned from people who lead this work in other places? Well, one of the first people we wanted to talk to, because we, as a team several years ago, at the recommendation of Lindsay Anderson on our team, read a book called Ghosts in the Schoolyard, but that was written by researcher Professor Ewing, that talks about Chicago's closing school process and the ways in which things went wrong, and she had sets of suggestions about what to do well. And so we studied that book as informing our process. And so we were really excited to be able to talk to her this summer. And one of the key things she was saying is that, understanding that school closure can be necessary, that's a thing that, in Chicago, she feels like people understand. But the key thing is that districts must make investments that are comparable to the thing that's being recommended and taken away. The big thing too that we've learned from her that I'm not quoting here, but has really informed our work, is importance in documenting and understanding the history of the school. She talks a lot about the loss of that history through these changes, and so that's something we've been attuned to and attentive to. We also talked to DC and Oakland schools, and what they held up is the importance of school leaders and the role they play in that transition, how they're a key success indicator to that, as well as paying attention to community folks who are the connectors and making sure they're well informed and to be ambassadors of the process, and really make sure you're connecting with all the people that need to be involved. From Chicago, we learned that there really needs to be close shepherding of the work and to measure the process and planning to make sure that what we intended as outcomes are actually happening. And then that needs to be like a close monitoring so that if there are issues that are coming up, you can address them pretty quickly. And then we also talked to Atlanta Public Schools CEO, former CEO, Dr. Karstoffen, and what she focused on is the need to make sure that, because this involves a lot of different folks, that the central office is really working across teams to fully support schools in transition. So what have we learned from our empathy interviews? Well, some of our parents were sharing that the communications were helpful. That one thing that would have been helpful for this particular parent in that process is having some of the just immediate questions people have answered, like in an FAQ. But she said that throughout the process, she felt like staff and the board was listening, and looking at what's happened since the change. She noticed that teaching has really improved and that teachers are more invested in her school community. From school leaders, again, we've heard about their ability to offer more offerings. This specific school leader talked about not only being able to do and have facilities improvements that are known and beloved by the school community, but being able to expand their offerings. Before the merger, the school only had 0.5 gym and 0.5 art. After that, they were able to add music, a computer class, and full-time library, as well as additional supports for teachers who really talked about the importance of having a literacy coach and an ed associate, because those people help the teachers be able to focus on their craft, and having someone help push and help them make better has really made a big difference in teaching and learning within her school community. From a community member, we heard that, again, we consistently throughout groups heard that the meetings that we had in that process were helpful. And in her particular process, she felt like both communities were really present, even though, initially people weren't very happy that they were engaged. And she said her only wish is that there were more parents who participated in those meetings. And the other thing she felt like we need to make sure we're doing within the process is having counseling available for students to help them process and talk about the transition and what it means. Another parent, again, sharing that the feeling again that district communications were effective, and talking about the changes she noticed in terms of the school after the merger, that the school now has gym, music, drama, more staff at recess, full-time art and a full-time librarian, things they did not have before. One of the teachers in the transition shared that the change opened up opportunities for her and her students that she did not know existed before. She talked about in her old school, they had to tape up books to make sure they could use them, continue to use them within their school. And in her new school, her principal caught her taping up books and said, hey, you don't need to do that. We can actually order books. Another staff member, again, commenting on, again, having that more music, full-time art, teacher, librarian, and how when they do choice events, students from other schools are surprised to see that they have a librarian. And mentioning that they now also have theater and drumming and other resources that did not exist before. We just finished one focus group with students that haven't gotten that in here from the students that we've talked to so far. One of the big things that we have as a takeaway is the need, they said, to make sure that we can develop within students' ability to advocate for themselves. With that particular transition, they were hoping to see more of a specific type of programming happen within their school around science and like a STEM focus. And this is, I think, before all the work we've done with SGAs, it wasn't a real place for them to be able to push in and to advocate for themselves. And so they suggested, having students, having someone help mentor and help teach students how to advocate for themselves as part of this. So that's something that we think that is really important. And the need to attend to students in transition, because they said there were some conflicts in the initial transition between students. And so how do we make sure that doesn't happen? We talked about the importance of having lots of events. This particular student groups that we talked to were from our first transitions under this new process. And so that lets us know that these events, like the one I shared, that we've added and continue to add, are really important for this process to help students become friends. PCAB gave us, the PCAB's policy review team gave us a lot of feedback. They mocked up the existing policy, and a lot of their recommendations we took, so you'll see those in the proposed changes. So I'm highlighting here some of the bigger things that they shared in their recommendations. One, that we should be fully defining the 8 COMAR factors. For the most part, we took their definition, so you'll see that when we get to those slides. That there should be alignment to policy KCA, so that we're saying, like how KCA that the board is committed to that collaborative two-way communication, and ensuring that we have a way to make sure there's access for speakers of other language and accommodations for individuals with disabilities in the process. That a tenet needs to be that the schools proposed for receiving students are as strong as the school of origin, and that we have a methodology for tracking quantitative and qualitative indicators and experiences of children and family following school closure. So let's get into the proposed revisions. So again, aligning to our goals, one of the first things that we're proposing to change, these are the major revisions for members of the public. You can look at the red lines, so it should be on board docs, to see holistically the changes that we're focusing on, the major ones here within this presentation. The first, aligning, we sort of replaced the language and the purpose to align to our equity policy. So this language comes from our equity policy, basically stating that the board is committed to building a generation of young people with the skill, knowledge, and understanding to succeed in higher education, careers, and community. The other thing, what's really important and how we do this and why we hold on to schools for longer periods of time, and we put all these events together, and are also thinking about how we maintain history in this, is that we really are trying to reform and combine school communities, so they're forming a new identity moving forward. And so it's not just a group of students coming to a pre-existing school culture to this other school, but that we're really combining them together. And so we wanted to make sure the language reflected that. So we changed it from like this kind of mechanical consolidating schools to really focus on the fact that we're trying to unify school communities with the goal of promoting equitable student access to high quality academic programming. And that second language is some of the feedback that we got from again. We're also proposing adding definitions to the policy. So clearly defining day, there's a lot of time requirements within the policy. So clearly indicating what we mean when we say day. We're talking about calendar days. Defining an educational program, which is our proposed definition so far is a tailored, specific academic courses and other educational program that serves students in a limited grade bands for a limited duration, which is different than when we're talking about a school. So we're going to make sure we're clearly distinguishing those two things, which is an educational institution led by a principal or equivalent position that provides programming for students across grades with its own cost center and has that designation from the state. We wanted to make sure that the school, family, and community council definition aligns to what's in KCA. And so you see that described there. And again, we're adding a section to more describe what happens in a surplus. And so we wanted to make sure we define what a surplus is, which is for us in city schools means to return a building that's no longer needed for educational purposes to the city of Baltimore. We are also proposing replacing language to make sure we're emphasizing the importance of inclusivity in decision making among key stakeholders, especially those who have been traditionally excluded. This again is language suggested us from PCAB's policy committee. They also suggested 2 public hearings, which is actually what we do. So we wanted to codify that. So that was in this policy. We wanted to make sure that our language also talks about what our work looks like, which is really recognizing the historical and political context matters, and that the goal is really driven by improvement and support for families and students. We wanted to identify the school, family, and community council as a body that should receive notification at the start of the process for any recommendation. And that part of their role would be to help make sure we're not missing any key partners, but we also need to provide notice to. From this steering committee, and this again comes from PCAB's policy committee, adding the community school coordinator as a member of that steering committee. They actually have always served in that role, but like actually codifying that in policy we think is important. Students, particularly for schools that have students in grades 6 through 12 as being invited members, we think that's important. Student voice has been really key to a lot of the work that we do in this. We also want to codify that the steering committee meets at least twice, which is what happens. And so we wanted to make sure that was actually codified in the policy itself, as it hasn't been a requirement, even though we've been doing it. Also codifying the committee is responsible for helping get the word out and making sure people have the document so that they're sharing like the study with other members of the school community, and in the case of a surplus with like neighborhood associations. So here's I noted at the beginning, like PCAB policy committee had a lot of suggestions around how we should define the 8 COMAR factors. And so, like I said, we took most of those. The 8 COMAR factors, as in the policy, which comes from state law, just has the things that are in bold, right? It doesn't have any description in the original policy, like just says student enrollment trend or age or condition of the school building. So all of the language after the things you see in black type bolded is new language. So being clear that, yeah, we're looking at 5 years of schools data, and we're disaggregating it for students with disabilities and English learners, and that we're including that comparison for both the school that's proposed for the action as well as the receiving schools, and that's consistently throughout. That for age and condition of the building, that we're including like major renovations for all of the buildings that are, all the buildings that house students that are involved. And for transportation, that we're really focused on considerations for safe travel of students and what needs to be in that report. For educational programs, that we're looking at the specialized programs that exist in schools, like an AP or honors, or special education programs, or athletics. If the school has any special designations, like restorative practice, if it has like before or after care, or tutoring and mentoring. Any kind of any special community or other partnerships. And then obviously we would also continue to include performance data and state assessments, school culture and climate, and including staff information, including teacher retention and certification data. In the career process, a lot of these things are there, but adding the retention data for teachers, certification data would be like a new thing. And I think it was a good suggestion that we got from PCAP. Racial composition, again, was part of disaggregated. We didn't combine it with the enrollment because it's one of the 8 COMAR factors, so we wanted to maintain that parity with the law. Financial considerations, for that we we're always looking at whether schools need additional allocations to stabilize their budgets, the ability of the school to provide all of the programming that students should have, any pending facility challenges, cost of those, and the facility debt. For student relocation, making sure we're looking at geographic challenges and opportunities, the distance of students from the school proposed to the schools they would be proposed to be rezoned to, movement of citywide programs, and impact on access to students if programs move. And then finally, impact on the community, making sure we're highlighting the opportunities and challenges for those who live in the geographic attendance area of the school or the proposed schools. So all of these would be within the proposed schools. So those are things that we want to make sure that we codify. Many of these things we do, but there are some new things in there. And then lastly, we're proposing to add a new section on facility surplus. So we wanted to make sure that that was like clearly defined, like what happens when we're surplusing a facility. And so we wanted to make sure we're establishing what happens like with a facility, if we're proposing a facility for surplus that has been emptied. There isn't a school community attached to it. And so identifying that schools within a 0.5 mile radius around that school community would be the ones to get that notice for schools like that. And then making sure that we have like a detailed process for what's the meetings and that we're notifying stakeholders, including, parents, partners, guardians, the school family council, elected and city officials, and neighborhood associations. We're talking about building surplus. And that for the for meetings around the surplus in the community, the school-based meetings that we have on surplus, that when possible, we would try to include the city of Baltimore, because a lot of what people have questions about is what's going to happen with the building after a surplus. And that's the process the city controls. But having them there at the start to be able to talk about what that process looks like and how it works, we thought it was important to codify in the policy. In the regulation, we wanted to make sure we codified the role of the transition committee. So at the start, you heard me mention how we have a transition committee. It's not codified in our policy, so we wanted to make sure it was included in the regulation. It's made up of with this change, we're proposing to define it as being made up of representatives from our school family and community councils of the impacted school communities, that it would have at least 2 parent guardian representatives. That's also consistent with feedback from PCAB's policy committee. and that membership is designated by the school leader and or from central office, and codifying the role of the transition committee, which is to support students and staff through the transition as the role. So we are here at Positivity. We'll be back for first reader on May 9th. We're going to continue to get feedback from folks on these changes between now and then. And I'm sure we'll, yeah. And so I'm going to pause here because I've been going for a long time. So I'm curious to see what the questions and feedback are.
Fantastic. Thank you, Angela. I really appreciate the very thorough presentation. So let me turn it over to my board colleagues with any questions they may have. I have some, and I'll start with mine. Commissioner Coy.
Yeah, no, happy to defer to others to start. Thank you so much, first off, for the presentation and going through all of that. Obviously, having spent a lot of time with you and the other commissioners in the operator renewal process, certainly see how this all plays out and the questions and the process there. One of the questions I had in looking at this was, you know, some of the historical context of different actions over time, right? So, you know, I know what this year's was, but I'm curious if you have available or how difficult it would be to provide kind of the past 5 years of like, here's how many were, you know, put up, maybe 6 years, given some of the way the operator renewal stuff is, but and this might be more specific to operator renewal. However, also other school building closures that do not fall into operator renewal could be of interest, but the recommendations for renewal or renewal conditions or closures or surpluses, just to get a sense for like what that looks like over time, would certainly be helpful for me and was one request that I had in looking at this. I don't need to answer that right now, but that's I guess that's what I'm asking, if you could work on that I didn't see in here. One of the questions that I did have, though, that if you could speak to, I'd appreciate that, is in the operator renewal process, there was an emphasis this year on the 5E survey tool. And I was looking for that in the policy to sort of see which ones would align to the things that come out of that evaluation tool, and wasn't sure if I was just not seeing it or if there was greater clarity for how the policy about how we evaluate aligns to that, or if that is more of an operator renewal tool and is not sort of, anyway, if you could speak to that, I'd appreciate it.
So for operators, it's our policy IGJ.
Before you dive in, I just want to like kind of break apart two things that Commissioner Coy shared. So one was a request for information over a 5-year period, right, Commissioner Coy, in terms of outcomes, and then secondarily, here's the second part around the 5E survey and how that's related to this process.
Yep. So operator renewal. So this SCA is about the closure of traditional schools. So for operator renewal, the policy that governs that process and any recommendations for closure is IHBJ. So that's that process. So in there, I think you would see like some of the things you were looking for. They were remembering for the most recent. There's within the policy and the regulation, there's a description of renewal and like what some of the factors. It won't name the 5E necessarily, but it will talk about the role of surveys. They talk about the role of surveys. I'm trying to, right now that policy is not fresh in my mind, but it does talk about looking at climate and using multiple indicators. And so it may say surveys. Within the school's contract, we have a operator renewal framework that kind of highlights what like the main things we look at when we do renewal. Similar like how with SCA is naming the 8 factors. It's just there's similar things, but they're a little different because there's different parameters for that. And one of the big questions we want to understand is why we started doing these empathy interviews and plan to do them, continue to do them following processes, is we want to understand impact on students and families who've already gone through like the whole thing. And so, and this is very much tied to our school improvement work. So for us, it's really important that we deliver on the commitment that we make and that you guys as the board make to these families around improved outcomes for students and families in the new schools. And so far, we're seeing a lot of promising things, right, in terms of what schools are being able to offer and what families and members of school communities are reporting to us. But we want to be able to understand that. So one of the things that I've been doing for the last 2 years is been having those school communities participate in the 5E because we're trying to see what's happening and use that information to help us figure out where do we need to shore up, where do we need to make sure that we're really helping these schools be strong and be able to deliver on the process. So it's not something that's necessarily in policy. I think a big part of where we're moving directionally as a district is really focusing on how we do school improvement. And I see that at the heart of this. Like we have to make sure that we are able to sort of document that. And I hope I answered your question. I hope I didn't lose the,
lead. Well, and also disaggregating that, like the operator renewal from traditional school, and obviously the 5E is something that is being thought about across all of the schools over time. But that sort of answers the very specific question that I have there, and I'm happy to defer to others.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Coy. Commissioner Esposito?
Hi, sorry, I kept having connection issues, but yeah, so I think one of the things that I hear from the community is the process being very fast and like being presenting in a way like it's a done deal. Because I even met a parent that knows several parents in the area surrounding a school that closed that was told years ago that the school would close and enrolled his child closer to Federal Hill, and so did his neighbors. So what impact is that having like on the enrollment numbers, which is part of the like justification of closing the schools? And also, I guess like a question is how are we able to compare two schools to each other, like as far as their programming, when schools are autonomous and crafting their programming around the community that they serve? So if a school, like how can that equitably be done if there's no guarantee that the communities are the same that are being merged? And do we have any, sorry, it's like three things. Do we have anything about how many students we're actually losing to closures because or that are not joining the transition school? Specifically, parents that decide to homeschool, go to charter schools, or completely move to another district. Because I think that those people that we've lost in the past probably have valuable feedback about how this can be done better and why they chose to do that.
Yep. Trying to ask three questions. I just want to make sure that I don't lose the three. And the first question, these aren't done deals. So, I mean, the board has done different things in different processes. So the process and the public engagement in the process is real. And so just because the CEO and staff recommend a change does not mean the board is going to do that change. Good examples of that, were like Renaissance High School, for example, several years ago was recommended for closure. Community came out and said, no, we really need this school. And the school is still open to that. Like the board listened to that and did not go along with that recommendation, as happened with Augusta Fells. So there are a number of schools. So the board isn't, and I know you're newer than sort of speaking for the board, but I don't know if you guys want to chime in. I guess all of you are sort of newer board members, but like the board doesn't.
Oh yeah,
the
just
board
to clarify.
Yeah, so just hold one second. The board doesn't necessarily go along with that. In terms of like, there's people, and I think the thing about Baltimore is like people all sometimes have beliefs about things that are not grounded in actions that we're actually taking as city schools. And so we are looking at like whether schools, you know, we are looking at whether schools are able to provide, especially in the last several years, programming in the earlier years of school closure. I think they were more so driven by school performance, you know, test data and grad data and that kind of thing, school climate data. In more recent times, we've been sort of dealing with the population loss. How do we make sure that schools have enough students to be able to really meet the needs of the students that they serve in more recent times? On the, I don't want to lose the thought on the second thing around the data. So we do have that data. We can share that with the board on percent of, you know, the increases in the schools in terms of students going to receiving schools since 1819. And I think the idea of, that's what we're trying to do through the empathy interviews, is reach out and talk to families. So the idea of talking to families who may show up somewhere else, we're just talking to families who've gone through transition. And so I think that is a good idea. That it is what we're trying to do. We're trying to just understand from all families, students, and staff impacted, like what this has been. So we're trying to get a representative, a group of people that we're talking to. And I feel like I missed the middle. There's a middle question that I forgot now. I feel like I asked your first and your third question, but not the middle question.
Well, actually, the first question was, it wasn't about the decision to close. This person was told when they initially engaged with the system to enroll their child for the first time that another school was a better fit because this one was potentially going to close. And this is years ago, and the school is still open. So it's impacted their enrollment numbers, and then also how many students we've lost and why they chose to not migrate to the school. So it's not the feedback from the ones that actually did go through the transition, it's all the other ones.
So Commissioner Esposito, like, may I take a stab at reframing just a little bit? So are you requesting to know, do we collect data on students who may choose alternative placements as a consequence of the process? So like if X school, if the board acts on a recommendation to close a school and a student goes to a receiving school, are they then therefore choosing a charter school, exiting the system because of whatever reason, homeschooling, or going to an alternate district for moving or whatever purposes?
Yeah, and also, are they being brought in to help frame how we're doing closures in the future? Because I feel like that feedback's like, it's not just the numbers, it's also the stories of the why that I think would be important in crafting like how we're doing it. Yeah.
So
yeah, that's
per action review. Like, are we
yeah.
I'll turn to Angela for that.
Okay, sorry. I want to make sure I didn't lose that. I mean, so we are trying to meet with any family, students, school communities who have fully gone through the transition. So they could have ended up, like you said, like at a charter school or another school, or left or did something different. So we're interested in talking to all of those folks. I think we're trying to identify them. So that's something we're interested in, and we're actively trying to figure out. I don't know that I have a perfect answer about if we're going to be able to talk to everybody, but like that's important. Like we're trying to understand impact, so that's a big part of what we're trying to do with these empathy interviews. Which, you know, we, like I said, we plan to continue to do these even outside of the policy. Like we want to really understand the true impact of the work, because that's important, and that'll help us in making sure we are actually doing what we're setting out to do, which is improve schools for students and families. So I think I let me know if I feel like I might still be missing something.
And I guess like the other thing that's needed is a clear timeline that allows the most community participation, like in the process. And also if for instance, like the school does close, you know, one of the past schools that closed, they didn't know that appeal was even on the table. So also providing that information transparently to the community that is an option?
We do communicate that. So that's part of what goes out in the, so it has to be publicized in the newspaper when we're making a recommendation. When the board decides, there's a clock starts once the formal decision goes out. And so that appeal notice goes out in the Baltimore Sun, the Daily Record. It also goes out in letters that we backpack home to students to take home to their families. We email out, we post on the district website. So there's appeal notice that goes in the letters. So we do that. So that's a big part of the thing, of the communications.
So Commissioner Esposito, I'm going to move us along because we're at 5 p.m. and I want to ask a question, and then I'm going to have my second question. So then, but one of the things when we're thinking, and I thank you, Commissioner Esposito. And if Angela can answer any more questions, she's happy to if you submit those in writing. One question that I just kind of want to go from a global perspective when thinking about policy as a lever for change. Angela, can you give me a sense of like who might be struggling with our existing policy outside? I want to recognize like the empathy interviews were really great, but outside of students and families, like who else might be struggling with our policy that we have right now that helps to inform where we're going with the new set of policies? Just to give notions of like where policy
who's struggling with our policy. I think
yeah.
I don't know how to answer that question. I mean, I think that there are people who just don't believe it. We struggle for a policy, but we actually have to have a policy that governs what you do if this happens. So I don't really know how to answer.
Yeah, I was thinking a little bit about like, we have a lot of different stakeholders who are involved in this work. So like kind of thinking a little bit about, one of the framing principles that you had in the annual review process around communities that experience the most disinvestment. So thinking about the range of stakeholders we have that we talk to, that we consider their opinions, like it might be helpful just to give a good sense of like, when we're having these conversations, what else goes to inform?
Yeah, I mean, we are talking to those folks like who live in those, whose students are in those school communities, who live in these in communities. So that is part of the what we've been doing in the our empathy interviews. And we're right now we're primarily focused on schools who've gone through the full transition. So we're not talking to folks who are actively in transition right now because they haven't gone through the full state of it to understand that.
So I appreciate that. That's very helpful. And just out of sheer essence of time, I just want to move us forward. I know we have a lot of comments in the chat right now. I'm not going to lift those up because I do want to get to public comment. We're running a little bit behind, but
if I can say one thing too, there's a lot of comments in the chat that are coming. We're in an appeal right now. So I just also want to caution us with some of the people that are commenting in the chat because we're actually in a legal, I don't know, Josh, if you want to give guidance here, but we are also in a legal process right now.
I think Angela phrased the update there, so I think we can continue.
Yeah, so we're not going to discuss any of the particulars that are being discussed in the comments right now. So I do appreciate that they're coming in, but we won't address those for legal reasons today. So thank you, Angela. I just encourage my fellow board members, if you have any additional questions on this, to submit those in writing. And I want to be able to turn to our next portion of our agenda this afternoon. So if we can shift to looking at policy JJA, student organizations, and that presentation this afternoon. I'm not sure who is leading that, or is Chief Heike Harbert doing that herself, or?
Good afternoon, commissioners. I'm Sarah Warren, the Executive Director for Whole Child Services and Support, and I will be leading our team today, but this is very much a group effort. So I'm going to ask my colleagues from across offices to introduce themselves as well. I'm going to start with Haley. There you go.
Hi, I'm Haley Filt. I'm a youth engagement specialist in the Office of Engagement, and I support student government district-wide. And I am going to pass it to our student tonight, Grant Travis.
Hello, my name is Grant Travis. I attend Port VOP at Digital Harbor, and I am an ad hoc member for ASCBC.
Sorry, I think Mr. Mosley, Dr. Mosley, I'm sorry. Principal Mosley, you're next up.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be in front of you today. Ben Mosley, school principal at Glenmount Elementary Middle School.
And good evening, everyone. My name is Danny Byerson. I am the educational specialist for extracurricular programming out of the Whole Child Office.
Great. Thank you, everybody. And I did also want to note that we have also been working very closely with our colleagues in the Office of Legal Counsel. They have been incredibly important partners in this whole process, as well as colleagues from teaching and learning. And as you'll see, as we move forward, in consultation with lots of students and many other stakeholders. So I just want to appreciate the incredibly collaborative effort that's been going on to lift this piece of work. So by way of introduction, again, we are here to talk about Board Policy JJA and revisions to that and its accompanying regulation. And at the same time, are integrating provisions related to student government and addressing student rights and responsibilities. So we'll say a little bit more about that as we get going. This aligns with several of our board priorities, 1, 4, 5, 6, and 7, because this is related to our students and student organizations in a very direct way. It is cross-cutting many of the board priorities. We realized in working on this that we were throwing around a lot of acronyms, so we just provided a key here to help folks. I do want to particularly call out SGA, Student Government Association, ASCBC, our Associated Student Congress of Baltimore City, the GSA, the Gender Sexuality Alliance, sometimes also called the Gay Straight Alliance, our BSAs, Black Student Organizations, and sometimes we talk about student-led organizations or SLOs. So just wanted to note those as we get into the presentation in case we're talking in letters. So again, our key objectives here are around updating our policy on student organizations and the regulation. Per the conversation that was held with the policy committee last year, there was a directive for us to go ahead and integrate student government and ASCBC into this policy and regulation rather than creating a separate policy around student government. So that's been a big part of this work. But we also were instructed by the committee to make sure that we were being mindful of the need to support other types of student organizations as well. And so making the access to support and defining the rights and responsibilities of these organizations we're trying very hard to be equitable and to be thinking about all different types of student groups in this process. Another key part of this effort that we're undertaking right now is to develop an accompanying student rights and responsibilities handbook. That is necessary both to bring us into compliance with state law and also to replace Board Rule 50910. And part of that effort is not only creating that handbook, but also making sure that we're aligning all of these things to existing rights and responsibilities across different policies. Oops. So in terms of process, this looks like roughly this process here. We've already done a lot of landscape analysis and consultation. We're currently sort of toggling between those two middle pieces. We're doing the policy revisions, continuously getting stakeholder input and feedback, starting to really dive into the work on the rights and responsibilities handbook, and thinking ahead to what implementation and impact measurement will look like.
Dr. Warren, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. It's important to note that equity is central to this entire process that we're undertaking. So both the work that we are doing now as we are thinking through the way that we engage people and consult folks on this process, the way we think about going about the revisions, the resulting outcome, the documents that we produce, all of these things have equity at their center. And then, of course, when we go to implement, it will be essential that we're continuously checking in on how we are measuring up to our own expectations and goals around making sure that processes and access and implementation is equitable for our students. So this is the rough calendar that we're working on. Obviously, we're here today, March 21st, and we will be working toward first reader on April 25th once we get your input, and we will continue with that stakeholder input in between. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Haley.
Hi. So we have been conducting the beginning stages of a landscape analysis, and the full landscape analysis will be one of the documents that comes along with the policy. But just to lift up some initial findings, there are 59 SGAs that we've identified and that I'm working to support across every region of the city. City Schools has doubled its number of student governments since the beginning of the year. That means that a lot of these are younger, and some of them need a little bit more support with capacity building. And then in terms of the demographics of SGA membership, SGA is racially proportionate to the student bodies that they represent. And then there will be a lot more information and data about which students are participating in SGA and what demographic groups they fall into that will come out as part of the landscape analysis. Danny?
Thank you, Haley. And to continue on with some of our initial landscape analysis findings, this slide is actually reflective of the current state of GSAs in city schools. So as of this school year, we have 46 schools that have an active there we go with the letters, GSA, with 60 advisors trained per the GSA co-coordinators. 40% of those at 46 have been active for at least one full school year prior to this one, which leaves it 60% new as of this school year. So definitely massive amount of growth, and looking to expand and also have more trainers involved. In addition, if you could run back one more slide. There we go. In addition to that, this visual just kind of outlines a segment of the feedback we received around just the different types of student organizations that are being offered around city schools. This is only representative of about 45 schools that completed the capture form submitted during the second quarter of this school year, but it paints a picture or a snapshot of the types of programs that students are participating in and or leading. So thank you. And we can go to the next slide.
So part of our landscape analysis has also been to conduct research into other LEA's policies around student organizations and rights and responsibilities. So one of the things we've discovered through that process, looking at a lot of our other districts in Maryland as well as across the country, is that many LEAs don't have policies that talk about student government at all. Lots of LEAs don't even have student organizations policies. And so City Schools really has an opportunity to do some groundbreaking work here in empowering our student leaders. Among those districts that do have student government policies, a lot of the time student government is rolled into their rights and responsibilities policy. So this is the case in Montgomery County and Baltimore County. And so we are also going to be talking about rights and responsibilities in our student organizations policy, because these two things often go hand in hand, right? Students have to have certain rights protected in order to be able to lead and organize effectively within their schools. So just to name that there is this connection between those policy aspects. All right.
And as Dr. Warren had already previously stated, that we've conducted stakeholder consultations and also still have some that are ongoing and queued up. So this slide here just highlights the ones that we've already completed as of the time of this presentation was submitted. So we've had our ASCBC consultations or input meetings, as well as with SGA student-led consultations. We've also had consultations led by district staff with students between grades 5 through 12, and then also a consultation session with PCAB, the Parent and Community Advisory Board. And I did want to just flag that in between the submission of this presentation and today, we've also conducted our consultation session with BTU and PSRP members, and also have sessions with GSAs and the Charter and Contract Advisory Board, as well as the Equity Advisory Group, also scheduled for the in-between time of this presentation and first reader. And before I'm going to actually toss it to our student representative, Grant, please feel free to take it away.
All right, so one of the main things that I'm really happy about is how this organization is doing a great job of making sure that all students' voices are heard, and making sure that we also get a little input as well. So one of the common themes are access to leadership. So some details are students want greater access to leadership opportunities through student-led organizations. Students believe eligibility criteria should prioritize students' access to engaging in their school and organizations. Within their organizations, students want autonomy to develop their own processes, and students need institutional support, including assistance securing an advisor for their student-led organization. And so these details were collected from ASCBC input sessions, SGA consultation conversations, and consultation conversations with student and diverse SLOs or SLOs. Another theme is inclusion and decisions. Students wanted substantive decision-making opportunities in their school, particularly through their student government associations, and they also wanted they wanted feedback after decisions are made. They also want to participate in decisions in the decision-making process. And so this information was gathered through ASCBC input sessions as well, and SGA consultation conversations, and consultation conversations with student and diverse SLOs. There's also clear communication and protocols. Students need clear processes and support to form and grow organizations. This includes access to lines of communication with school leadership, access to school-sponsored communication platforms through announcements, clear protocols to secure advisors, funding, facilities, and resources for activities. And so this was heard from SGA consultation conversations, and also consultation conversations with SLOs also. And the last and final one, appeals process. Students wanted students need a complaint or appeals process if advisors or administrators do not fulfill their responsibilities under this policy. And this was heard from ASCBC input sessions and SGA consultation conversations.
Thank you so much, Grant. And I want to lift up too that Grant actually is one of the students who was helping to host and facilitate those consultation conversations that ASCBC led with SGAs across the district back in December. So he's been involved in this process from the beginning, and he's on ASCBC's JJA policy subcommittee. So the reason that we decided to organize our student consultation themes in this way, access to leadership, inclusion and decisions, clear communication and protocols, and appeals process, is so that we can really show the board and the community that we're pulling from what students have said directly to influence the policy revisions. So when we get to presenting the policy revisions, I'll just ask you guys to remember back to these 4 themes that we've been hearing from students. Danny, you want to take it away?
Sure thing. Thank you. Thanks, Grant. So as previously discussed, the other component of this work has been around student rights and responsibilities. And if you look on the left side of your of the presentation, you'll see some of the proposed rights that we and responsibilities that we use to frame the conversation with students in these, excuse me, and other stakeholder consultations. And more particularly around the student feedback, what we saw was that there was a consensus around, generally around student rights, that they were pretty agreeable about it. One of the ones that I wanted to kind of call out was students named as something that was not explicitly stated in the proposed rights was the need for a right to social emotional wellness. I definitely like the way that they framed it, which is like kind of like the right to a mental break or a mental health break is kind of how they put it in literal terms. So that was one I wanted to call out. And then under that, you'll see the proposed responsibilities that we lifted up for students to reflect on and give input. And some of the ones that were noted were around having the ability, or excuse me, naming that all students may not have the ability to have the proper materials to learn on an every daily basis. So making sure that there's language to support that. And another one that I wanted to specifically name was around safeguards or safety protocols being put in place for students who are doing the reporting of bullying, harassment, or illegal behavior. So those are some of the ones that I wanted to flag. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Danny. So now we're into the meat and potatoes. This is actually how the policy has changed. So to just kind of frame it for everybody, the most important thing that's changed is the purpose of the policy. So the purpose of this new policy is to support accessible, equitable, and thriving student organizations. And there are sort of three big buckets that are going to accomplish that aim. So the first is nailing down students' rights and responsibilities. So naming in the policy that city schools will develop this rights and responsibilities handbook. And then also articulating those First Amendment rights that are critical for student organizing. So these are individual rights, but they fit into a broader vision of young people being able to lead successful student organizations. The second big bucket is supports that apply to all student orgs. So one is naming support for historically marginalized student groups, so gender sexuality alliances, Black student unions, for example. Also creating clear and well-publicized approval processes that streamline the formation of new student groups and make it easy for kids to request use of facilities or access to activities funds or any other material resources that they may need to accomplish their objectives. And then to publish those on a centralized hub that students can easily access. Also supporting all student organizations, developing eligibility criteria that prioritize student engagement and align with our existing policies around eligibility, creating access to an appeals process, and also committing city schools to build capacity for the adults and the young people who are involved with student organizing. And then the last big bucket is student government. So stating that all students have a right to representation from their peers through student government, and then that student governments have some rights as well. So right to a constitution, advisor, institutional support, and that all students get to participate in elections. Requiring the SGAs be formed in every high school, and then building in clear lines of for students to participate in decision making at the school. So making sure that student groups are rolled into school family community council, and that all of the adults and kids who are participating in this kind of expansion of democratic decision making have support and capacity building opportunities. So I will kind of, having framed it out like that, go into more of the nitty gritties of the policy. I am not going to go through every one of these because we'll be here all night, but I'm going to lift up the numbers that are the most substantial changes to the policy. And then I'm also just kind of ask the group in the justification section to notice where these revisions are coming directly out of the themes that we heard in student consultation conversations. The first thing I want to name is that the title needs to change. So student organizations isn't going to cut the mustard anymore. We need to expand this. We're looking at currently draft title student organizations and governance. We're also changing the policy purpose. The current purpose kind of emphasizes uniformity and compliance, and really what we want to highlight is that this is about supporting robust and accessible and equitable student organizing. And then we can go to the next slide. Quite a few things that I want to lift up here. So we've added a definition of student government associations and categorized them as a subset of school-sponsored organizations. Then the one that's labeled number 9, naming that students have a right to organize, to promote, and to participate in student organizations, and that schools need to support equitable access for all students. Furthermore, this is just specifically naming eligibility criteria, that those need to be developed in order to minimize barriers for student participation. So if administrators want to, retain that discretion, they should be prioritizing accessibility and equitability. And then finally, that each school is responsible for publicizing a process by which students can seek approval for a new organization. Last on that slide, stating that all high schools required to create student governments and to support their development. Elementary and middle schools are encouraged to establish a student government. Okay, you can go to the next page. Thank you. Great. So then this is about revision 11 is about building student organizations into pre-existing school-based decision-making bodies. So specifically school family council and any other organized body, making sure that young people have an opportunity to participate in those organizations. And then 12, stating that city schools is responsible for providing training and technical assistance, and that city schools will partner with ASCBC in this work, because ASCBC already does a lot of work to develop young people's capacity in leadership already. So there's a natural opportunity for collaboration there. And then point 13, that city schools will develop a student rights and responsibilities handbook that will synthesize policy JJA, as well as all of our other key student-related board policies. This will bring us into compliance with COMAR, and it will make sure that we are kind of meeting the mark of other benchmark LEAs that lay out young people's rights and responsibilities. All right, so those are the changes to the policy. Moving on, there's a lot of changes to the regulation as well. So I'm gonna start with number 3. I've already sort of mentioned this instruction to administrators that they develop eligibility criteria that are equitable. Number 4, naming that administrators are responsible for making school activity funds, student activity funds, accessible to student organizations, and that there be a clear and consistent process for young people to apply for or access these funds. And then number 6, to establish a consistent process by which schools approve the formation of student organizations. And this would also require, if an administrator wanted to deny a student's application to form a new organization, that administrator would need to provide justification and offer the student an opportunity to revise their application and try again, so that we don't have situations where young people are being denied the right to organize a new group and without any access to a recourse or explanation. Okay, moving on to the next set of revision. Yep, there we go. So I'm going to jump to number 8. This is a big one. This basically lays out what specific privileges student governments have so that they can effectively represent their peers. So one is that they have the right to prepare a constitution, to get an advisor who's compensated for their work, to be included in school decision making, to have regular communication or meetings with administrators, to serve as a channel for other students' petitions, to receive a timely response to recommendations that are offered to the administrator, to receive support in accessing school facilities, to have excused absences for approved activities, and to seek assistance from the principal supervisor if the principal persistently fails to honor these rights. So there's a lot packed in there. And I think that this is really every aspect of what students have called for in terms of access to leadership, inclusion in decisions, clear communication and protocols, and appeals process is reflected in this revision. Revision number 9 establishes all students' right to vote in student government elections, as well as to seek office in student government associations. We want to make sure that all young people have access to leadership opportunities. And then revision 10 on this page establishes that schools will not restrict, but rather support the formation of other student groups, especially historically marginalized or underrepresented groups like gender sexuality alliances and Black student unions or associations. Okay, and then the last set of revisions, thank you everybody for sticking with me. Great. I'm going to start with number 12. So as I mentioned earlier, laying out some individual student rights is really crucial to creating a environment in which students can safely organize with their peers. So the First Amendment rights that are named in this revision are the right to circulate petitions, freedom of expression, and freedom of assembly. The policy also names that there are limits to these rights and that students need to exercise these rights appropriately. And it also says that city schools needs to develop a comprehensive student rights and responsibilities handbook that will be distributed to young people and families. Revision 13 establishes that city schools is responsible for providing system-wide supports to ensure that we implement this policy with fidelity, that we're going to identify schools that need additional assistance, that we're going to provide system-wide guidance to implement this policy, and that we'll have that hub of student-facing resources, as well as guidance for administrators when they're developing their budgets and trying to figure out how to support student organizations. And last, students have said they needed an appeals process to make sure that if their administrator is not actually meeting the criteria of this policy, they have access to the next person in the chain of command. So following an encouragement towards restorative conversations and handling things informally, there is also a way for young people to then escalate to have their needs met. Okie dokie. So thank you for listening to all of those revisions. That's the policy and regulation.
Thank you, Haley, for that very robust and dense information. I know we are processing that, but nonetheless, we appreciate it. And I'd be remiss if I didn't shout out and acknowledge Grant. Grant, thank you for your time spent with us tonight, young man. You're doing well. Thank you. Did very well, sir. So the next few slides are really going to consist of alignment, rights, and the measures of the policy. And the slide that we have highlighted here is more so speaking to the alignment, in which you'll find that this policy intersects with many of the other board policies and regulations. So this policy is not found in isolation. And specifically, at the bottom, you'll read that in policy JJJ, where we may need an update considering the distinction between the elementary and secondary schools in regards to the eligibility criteria for participation in extracurricular activities. So there is a correlation with many of our policies, and even more specifically, just speaking to that JJJ there. So here we get into more so the rights and the student rights and the responsibilities while being in compliance and being aligned with COMAR's guidelines for students' rights and responsibilities. Here you will find 5 bullet points really highlighting our alignments, our alignment efforts, focusing on access, focusing on communication, as well as focusing on feedback. The first bullet point really speaks to the student organization and summarizing the students' rights and responsibilities. We also highlight and focus on getting feedback from our students and our stakeholders. What does that look like? What does that feel like? And how do we put that into action? Again, making sure that we are aligned with COMAR and making sure that students and families have the proper accessibility to the information provided. And then it is reviewed by all stakeholders for the upcoming school year. The rights and responsibilities handbook will also be posted on our website and be distributed at the beginning of the school year as well, whereas all elementary school students are incorporated into the school handbooks and high school levels and summarized on the family guide. So that's another way of implementation, getting that communication out to all stakeholders, schools, families, parents, and others. On this slide right here, considerations for implementation. We found the need to support or provide supports to those schools, and not just the schools, but also to school leaders through multiple training opportunities, and also by providing significant resources, and not just a one-time resource, but a continuous resource for all stakeholders to resort to. The first line there, we speak about the training, flushing that training out to the schools, implementing for implementation for students and schools and parents to have a better understanding and background of the actual policy. Central office providing information sessions, videos, and other forms of communication, again, just backing and supporting the true understanding to students, families, and community partners. Enlist student leaders, such as Grant, to partner with us to raise awareness efforts so they're in the know of this policy. And then based on the policy regulation, again, that long-time resource kit that school leaders as myself, schools, community members, parents can reference to, so they have a kit or they have a turning point when questions arise, or if they have a situation that they could refer to. And then more considerations for implementation is this really speaks to us fostering growth and supporting the systems that we'll be implementing, as well as building student leadership. Over the past few months, the district has hired a full-time engagement youth specialist who has conducted a number of next steps in order to get this policy rolling. And that includes 24 coaching calls with SGA advisors, 15 site visits to different SGAs, Glenmount being one. And more, even moving from 21 to 59 AUs for SGA advisors. We're going to continue that theme with training. We find it very critical and important that we just don't flush it out with the proper training materials and the proper reference points. And in addition to that, having a tiered approach, a cumulative approach, and an ongoing approach based on the advisors and their needs. Also, building student leader capacity through the General Assemblies. Hosted 3 General Assemblies, convening of 150 to 200 student leaders. Also, student government leaders participating in advocacy work, organization, and training, leadership trainings. That is very vital. Again, this policy is not subject to just adults or parents, but we really want to hone in on student leadership, student voice, student activism, and their rights. Also, with the 130 student registrations in the state, the Maryland Association of Student Councils, making sure that our students are very well represented and trained, which those trainings will be provided for students and for advisors. And here below are 4 key areas that will help to measure our impact on what this policy actually brings to the table. Here you'll find the measure of impact on student organizations and the student wholeness. In this case, what are some of the metrics? Tracking the number and types of student organizations, tracking the attendance and the wholeness and the composite scores relative to the percentage of students that are involved in student organizations. The second measure is measure of SGA quality, really developing a rubric that schools can follow so it's not in chaos or in whirlwind, where it's something that is substantial, that is concrete, and that schools can follow in order to create a more in-depth impact with our SGAs. I administer the rubrics daily to measure that there's for continuous improvement, starting with the baseline, but then schools should see an improvement of their organizations throughout time. And also providing tier supports when belief and we're acknowledged that schools certain schools may need more support than others. Some schools already have organizations up and running or are even thriving in many cases. But how do we offer that tier support to those students that are lifting that from off the ground? Measuring access to leadership through SGA, again, tracking numbers and students served, and also disaggregating disaggregating the data for students involved in SGA, either by grade level, race, gender, educational background, and EL status as well. And last is really measuring the impact of student leadership on school and student success, comparing the wholeness composite scores against schools with SGAs and schools that do not have SGAs. And then conduct ongoing consultations with students, faculty, and administrators, and all stakeholders in regards to the quantitative data that the SGA impact has on their school community. And I believe that slide reads questions and discussion.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. I really appreciate that. And thank you, Sarah, Haley, Danny, and a special thank you to Grant. I really appreciate whenever we have the opportunity for student voice. This is, after all, about your education. And so who better to help us craft policies than students? And so really do appreciate just your insights and your leadership today. So thank you. We have, we're kind of running behind on time. And so I'm going to ask that my fellow commissioners limit to one question each. Commissioner Katzhoppe is here as well, our student commissioner on the board. And so I would like to start with him if he's got any questions to lead us off, and then we'll move through.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm unmuted now. I'm having some connection issues. So I just wanted to really quickly take a moment. I don't necessarily have any questions myself, as this is a policy that we've gone over pretty extensively in ASCVC internally, and also talking with other people about it. And so I really wanted to use my time to just commend all of the great work that's been done on this policy. And really, if there's one thing that I want to have accomplished when my term is over at the end of this year, it is to get this policy through, and to make sure that the future of student organizing in Baltimore is a bright one, and one that is really leading the nation on a more progressive vision for the role that students should play in their education, and teaching good civic responsibility to students from a very young age. And getting us involved in organizing and politics. I think that that is ultimately not only a good thing for education, but also a good thing for society in general, and the world. So, yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Katzhoppe. I appreciate that. Let's see, my other fellow commissioners, Commissioner Esposito or Commissioner Coy, do you have any questions or comments this afternoon?
Looks great. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I certainly do have at least a comment. If not, I have a number of questions that I've written out, but I do recognize the time, and also want to shout out to Commissioner Kenyatta Bay, who's also, I saw, sort of on the call listening, even though he's not on this committee specifically. So this is a topic that I know is of deep interest in. Just echoing Commissioner Katzhoppe, your comments, I think there's no more clear example of what significant change is possible than what has happened this year with student government across the district, right? I remember back in October, there was the concern about the amount of time ahead of one of the votes, and there was a shift made, and there was a commitment made then to really double down and support student government associations, and just lifting up that has been substantive, that has been authentic, and it's worth every bit of recognition and celebration of that work. So I think my question that I will ask, because I have other ones that are like related to the Senate Bill 31 and sort of like how that's contemplating some of this stuff. I won't ask those questions here now, but I will ask this one, which is, what lessons would you share with us about how other areas of work could have a similar degree of growth and positive change? Like, how can we learn from what you all have done relating to student government associations in things relating to mental health supports, or trauma-informed care, or proactive efforts to reduce violence impacting young people? Like, what should we be learning from you all about how we can see changes on those things? That's my question, even though it doesn't relate specifically to this one policy. I want to learn from you all in that regard.
So Sarah, I don't know if you want to take that question. I know it's a very broad question, but I don't know if there's any insights you can share.
I mean, my first answer is going to be hiring a really rock star dedicated team member that can lead the work and engage directly with our young people. So I'm going to actually turn it over to Haley to say a little bit about how she has been doing this work and some of the lessons learned. Because to me, Haley has been an amazing partner and breath of fresh air. So I want to shout her out and all the work she's doing here.
Y'all are making me blush. I would say, I think the thing that's been really inspiring about work in this work group, right, which crosses a whole bunch of departments and everybody has been an amazing team player throughout this process, is the driving value, belief, paradigm, what have you, in this work group is trusting kids. And I think that when you proceed from that, having that faith in young people, engaging them from the very get-go, I don't know how common it is to have young people participating actively, not just giving input or feedback on the policy, but meeting with lawyers, and helping look at red lines. I don't know how often that kind of thing happens, but it's been really powerful to be part of that, and just see the incredible feedback that we've gotten from all of our stakeholders and especially our students. And every single revision that we've made, I feel like, has come directly out of a kid's suggestion. So that would be, yeah.
Fantastic. Great. And I just want to close out this section by thanking you just for the really kind of just robust way in which this presentation is put together. So the journey map, I think, is really important, as well as kind of highlighting the stakeholder engagement. The themes are very clear all the way through to the output, and what we can expect to see as kind of measures. And so I really do appreciate the way in which this was packaged and put together this afternoon. I know when this comes forward to just the full board, I think the opportunity to really share more of that student experience, and also thinking through also the opportunity to share more about what may be some of the opportunities and growing pains for our high schools, as well as the opportunities. I know we talked a little bit at lower grades and lower schools out there, would be really helpful and useful to hear in the full board meeting as well. So thank you immensely to the entire team for this really well done presentation this afternoon.
Thank you. That's really helpful guidance. We appreciate it. We will bring that forward for the first reader. And thank you for just supporting us all the way through this. And thank you again to our students who have been amazing partners in this.
All right, tremendous work. Thank you, guys. Awesome. So here we are at 5:47. We may go a little bit longer. I know this is not traditional, but we recognize that our two presentations were really meaty this afternoon. Wanted to give those full space. But I do want to turn to public comment. I know BTU is here. Tanisha, do we want to start with BTU?
Yes, that would be great.
So Mr. Nathan Farrell, I'm going to give you the stage.
Greetings, everyone. Is my audio okay?
It is fantastic, Nathan.
Great. Really appreciate the work of the committee and the service of everyone in the space. Nathan Farrell speaking on behalf of BTU in reference to policy FCA and the compliance reports for BLB. So I want to clarify that there are currently a number of level 4 grievances and appeals that the district has stalled and are not moving forward. Some of these level 4 grievances, as well as the appeals, have been stalled for 6 months to a year, and this is unacceptable. 6 months to a year. And we thank you for your questions earlier, but the context that you heard from the district does not really paint a complete picture of the issue, and the BTU looks forward to working with commissioners to ensure that level 4 grievances and appeals are processed and that the hearings are granted. Regarding policy FCA, the BTU appreciates the district's work on this issue and the revisions. It's concerning, however, that the district has chosen to only highlight positive testimony and experiences in the presentation to the committee regarding what we've learned from people who've undergone school closure. We know that there are a myriad of experiences that should be included, and not only the ones that favor the efforts of the district. I just want to highlight in the case of Stewart Hill, community members were removed from communications around school closure. Stewart Hill students are being sent to Franklin Square, which is actually a building that's in poor condition, or an over-enrolled building at Francis Scott Key, which is significantly further away. In terms of the physical plant, which was brought up tonight, Utah Marshburn is a 2-star school. It was rezoned to 3 buildings. Furman and Coleridge are also 2-star schools. They're not better schools, and they're both in poor or fair condition. That's data from the CEFMP Appendix H. And Dorothy Heights actually a 1-star school. It's not a better school. But the point is that the BTU is concerned that the district does not collect or provide data to the public on what happens after a closure. So city schools educators are held up to incredibly high levels of scrutiny in terms of the data that we collect on our students, which affects our evaluations, our pay, and our careers. However, the district is not held to the same standard, nor has it presented any evidence of the outcome after a school closure. And we need that data to understand what we've done to be successful and how we can improve this policy moving forward. So the BTU is requesting robust systems to evaluate the outcome of closed schools and make that public to communities and affected students. Now, regarding the steering committee, BTU proposes that the steering committee also includes 2 BTU members of that school community as designated by the president of the BTU. So as we've heard in the chat or seen, the school closures can be a divisive issue. They can breed mistrust and fear of district officials by school community members. And in many cases, school community members have stronger relationships and a deeper level of trust to the educators who serve their students, other than sometimes more so than central office officials. Educators by nature are able to support families and community members to communicate their needs during the process of a school closure and, of course, during the transition after a determination to close the school has been made. That's what we do. So by ensuring that you have 2 BTU members on the steering committee as designated by the president of the BTU, the school community will be better represented, and we believe it will improve trust and transparency.
Mr.
Regarding
Corral,
public
if you
feedback,
can wrap up your last statement for me, please. Thank you.
Yes, brilliant. Regarding public feedback, the BTU strongly believes that representatives from the city of Baltimore must be present. So we want to change the language where it says when possible to mandate that they're present. It's really essential that city officials are present during those public hearings. We appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farrell. I really appreciate your comments this afternoon. Tanisha, do we have any additional recognized groups? Afternoon.
Yes, I'm here from PCAB.
I'm so sorry. I couldn't find. Thank you so much, Ms. Schober. I couldn't get to my mic. Thank you. Oh my God.
All right, Ms. Schober, you're up.
Good afternoon. My name is Melissa Schober, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Parent and Community Advisory Board. Last year, PCAB consulted with community members with lived experience from closed or slated for closure schools to significantly revise policy FCA and its related administrative regulation. We shared our revisions with staff. We also reviewed published literature on the effects of school closure, for example, a 2010 study of Latino and African American students in the Western US that found declines in academic performance. Similar effects were found in studies of Chicago school closures, which noted the loss of peer connections, decreased trust and confidence in school futures, and dismantling of informal but tailored pedagogical strategies. PCAB appreciates that the district faces fiscal constraints and external pressure to maintain a high utilization rate and hope, after many closures in the 2010s, that we are entering a period in which school closures are largely behind us. But hope is not a strategy. PCAB notes that staff followed the closing schools policy and administrative regulations to a T and complied with COMAR in its recent recommendation to close Utah Marshburn and Stewart Hill. But the decision to close those schools felt to many like a corporate factory shutdown in which boxes were checked, but where initial and sustained engagement with the affected communities was lacking. PCAB thanks the district for its red line changes it has made thus far and believe that these will improve the now paltry and largely pro forma engagement process. While we welcome these changes, we wish to reiterate strongly a few key points. The need for quantitative and qualitative data now. Dozens of schools have closed in the last decade, and it is simply unacceptable and unbelievable that the district has not consistently collected and transparently reported on how students and families fare forced post-transfer. If the district wishes to assert that closure is tied to improving students' access to high-quality programming and physical infrastructure, it's incumbent upon it to provide evidence for such a claim. PCAB calls upon the district to collect and publish this data related to closure, including on academic performance, absenteeism, promotion and retention, accrual to selective middle and high school programs, and graduation. This reporting should include community needs assessment and details of the needs of schools slated for closure and receiving schools. It should be conducted in partnership with city agencies and should report on possible community effects, for example, the willingness of future enrollment by families with young children. Decision-making that incorporates both the district's recommendation and supporting evidence and the school community's recommendation and supporting document. For example, the proposed red line currently reads, the CEO will arrange at least one school-based community meeting to hear school community feedback on the proposed surplus of a building facility. When possible, representatives from the city will be present. Representatives from city agents must be present to hear from affected residents, and they must be prepared to describe and document their substantial and ongoing efforts to preserve the dignity of the closed building and respect the agency of the community in hearing its wishes for disposition. Optional is not enough. Third, prompt responses to requests that ease closure when it is inevitable, such as assistance with safe routes to school for students from Utah Marshburn who will have to cross North Ave to Dorothy I. Height or Druid Hill Ave to Furman, or those from Stuart Hill who will have to cross to Baltimore and Fayette Street. A public accounting of these requests must be cupped and shared with members of the school slated for closure and receiving communities to ensure answers are consistent and to best leverage scarce resources. We welcome the changes to the existing policies that lengthen the timeline for closure and add a parent and student to the formal committees during the closure process. That said, authentic engagement before and during the school closure decision-making process will translate to less harmful and traumatic transition after a school closure. Relatedly, we reiterate our recommendations to include representation from the BTU, not to limit parent representation to individuals from the school, family, and community council as they are not present in every school, and to explicitly include accessibility standards for participation in all related events and meetings for individuals with disabilities and for speakers of a language other than English, none of which was included despite it being included in our red lines. We thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Ms. Schober. I really appreciate your comments this afternoon. Tanisha, do we have additional recognized groups or other?
No more groups. We just have the two individuals.
All right.
Would you like me?
Yes, if you could tee them up, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Next, we have Mr. Nathan Tarter. Are you present?
Yes. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yep, we can hear
you. Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm Nathan Tarter, speaking as part of the Shea Strong Coalition. It's a coalition of neighborhood parents, community members, institutions, local media, all in support of Stuart Hill Elementary School. And I will be speaking on behalf of that with specific recommendations for changing the FCA policy of school closure. Before sharing my comment, I would like to reread a statement by the Commissioner Chantel Roberts before unanimously passing her motion during the General School Board meeting on January 25th, 2022, which is presumably the model upon which the policy updates are being made and will be the basis of my comments. Commissioner Roberts, after requesting that a targeted portfolio strategy be provided to the board, that addresses but is not limited to school enrollment, utilization, school community rezoning, etc. She shared this in support of her motion. I know that we have the 21st century school plan. We did have that 10-year school plan. But in terms of this vote, something that was highlighted for me, especially this portfolio review session, was every year we get recommendations for school closure. I can't tell you what's going to happen next year, and that's challenging for me. That's challenging for families who plan. That's challenging for communities to plan and to engage. For someone that sits in my seat, if I'm here for the next 3 years, I have no idea what the different portfolios should even be. And so every day that we are a collaborative partner to the larger Baltimore City ecosystem, how are other partners able to engage with us if we don't have a targeted strategic plan? That's what Commissioner Roberts shared in 2022, and here's my comment. I urge the board to consider amending the existing policy changes as follows: that no school closure would be considered by this board until a portfolio strategy is in place for an entire 3 years with clear measurable goals at the individual school level. And further, I urge you to establish a timeline for closure if a recommendation does come up and is acted on by you, the board, that you would not ultimately shutter or surplus a school building until a following 3 full school years. That would allow for a school to prevent a standard to prevent closure and allow them to remain open. And finally, when a school is recommended for closure, I would reiterate the written recommendations of PCAB that students be directed to receiving schools where academic, social, and attendance performance indicators, however you decide to define them, are at least as strong as their school of origin. And this will allow school administrators and communities to plan and potentially find ways to change outcomes that prevent closure and attract new students. It will also allow every other city agency to plan more consistently to align neighborhood goals around all the institutions run by the city and state. City schools and you as a board are probably the most important people in the city of Baltimore, and your decisions matter so much to families. A Baltimore city planner recently said at a Southwest Partnership meeting, referencing the 2020 census data, that Baltimore—
Good afternoon, Mr. Tarter. I'm sorry. I don't mean to cut you off, but could you wrap up your last thought for us? Thank you so much.
Just about to end, yes. I just want to share this quote from a city planner, that Baltimore, quote unquote, Baltimore City is hemorrhaging families. And we know that due to single decision by this body, you can help retain those families or create a situation where they flee this city. And so I urge you to please slow down the process of school closure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Charter. I really appreciate your comments this afternoon.
Thank you. Yeah, we have one more, Mr. Noah Nelson. Are you available, Mr. Nelson?
Hi, yes, thank you. How are you? How's everybody?
We are well, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'll try to be as quick as possible with this. So, to be straightforward, the policy of school closures needs to cease in Baltimore City schools. Since 2010, over 11,000 schools have been closed in the United States. Each year, we as a district continue to add to these numbers and perpetuating systemic violence in the process, which should not be the case for a district that pushes for equity. Although closing schools are a reform strategy in efforts to improve student outcomes, it's shown the opposite. These closures were mostly in neighborhoods experiencing structural violence and had larger numbers of Black people. These schools are systemically disinvested in, putting a stronger burden on the teachers and staff that work so hard there. And as we look back on the schools that have been closed in Baltimore City, the trends are clear. And we have to question this idea of displaced students doing better or receiving better in their new schools. In fact, in many cases, displaced students do worse. Looking at our very own Baltimore City Schools data, displaced students from the former schools closed in 2018, Grove Park, MLK, Coldstream, just to name a few, all of the following year reported lower school outcomes according to the STAR rating and state report card for 2019. I was intentional of not including the pandemic year, as every school was impacted in various ways, and measuring the school based on those years would be unjust. Chicago was mentioned in the reasoning. However, researchers in Chicago compared schools and found that there was no real change in students' math or reading outcomes. In fact, they had lower outcomes in majority of those cases. And it showed also in their test scores. And it's the same story in a different city. The rationale does not help at all. Additionally, only small number of students were able to attend top tier labeled schools. So in this, the schools proved to be much further away from where the community actually lived. The distance played a huge role for displaced students. And for the displaced students, the number of days they missed increased, and their suspension rates were higher for these students. These schools that are closed are under-resourced. And yes, you are correct, where a student goes after plays a role, but typically new schools are not that much better, which highlights the overall disinvestment in these types of schools. Students in neighborhood schools already do not have access to the different transportations that already make it challenging and completely undermine the parent and student concerns on their day-to-day commutes to schools. And with this being said, I propose the practice of school closures to end, as it only continues to allow the disinvestment in schools. There is no in-between that can justify the disinvestment with our schools primarily schools with large demographics of students of color that have to face each and every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. I appreciate your comments this afternoon. All right, I think that, Tanisha, that takes us to the end of public comment.
Yes, that's the end of public comment for today.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much to the public recognized groups, as well as the folks who contributed comments in the chat this afternoon. We really do appreciate that. Before we close this afternoon, I just want to see if there's any additional comments from my fellow board commissioners based upon anything we've heard today before we close out. Commissioner Esposito.
Hi, I just wanted to know, is that possible to put a halt to all closures? Like until that requirement's made? Because I didn't know about Commissioner Roberts' opinion about that. So like, is that something that we could do?
I'm going to refer to our Chief Legal Officer, Chief Siddons.
So we can look and follow up, Commissioner, on that piece and get back to you. I think that the board has the authority to close schools, and there's specific statutes that provide factors for closing schools. So and other school districts have typically set out the parameters in policy, but I think that it is, the board needs to think carefully and work in the legal context about how they set the parameters for the working through this process.
Thank you. Yeah, and also if it does have to do with state policy that is impacting and almost like forcing city schools to close, maybe there's a way that we can make a recommendation that there should be an exemption, especially in Baltimore City, given the disinvestment. Yeah.
And remember also, and others can chime in, that part of the 21st Century Building program was a commitment that the state required us to make to get utilization rates up, and that was pushed through in terms of school closures being a factor in that. That was part of the investment agreement that was made at that time.
Can I ask a quick clarifying question? Was that based on the current population? Because if Baltimore City were at like I see a lot of efforts improving the to revitalize neighborhoods and to increase the population of the city as a whole. So maybe both things can exist, the current schools that we have in our portfolio and also 21st century schools.
That was based on, our school system is built for serving like approximately like 200,000 students. And so like our current enrollment has been declining. So we're like well less than half of that. And so with 21st century and, with like how we've been trying to pair these things with investments, that whole plan, which is like really developed by the whole community, that was like a whole community process around 21st century, was to make sure we could focus on and prioritize communities where we knew we were going to have to close schools because of that severe population loss, as being the very first communities to get the investments in 21st century, which are both facilities investments and around academic planning and strong leadership. So it's a holistic approach. And that was intentional because we knew that as part of 21st century requirements, in order to get this, you need to get the funding. And what was happening with schools, there would have to be closures as part of that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
And Commissioner Esposito, I encourage you to reach out to Angela. I think she'll have a lot more insights on kind of just all of those kind of parameters that we're working through with 21st century and like how that kind of leads us to where we are today. Commissioner, let me see, who do I have? Oh, Commissioner Katzotti, I'm sorry. Did you see your hand?
Yeah, so I also wanted to sort of comment on some of the things we've been seeing in the chat, and also specifically in response to, whoa, I just sunk. in response to something that Mr. Tartar brought up, he was talking about the specific star rating of schools that we're being transferred to and from. And I know that we haven't discussed this, at least in the public board meetings, but there was only one 5-star school in all of Baltimore City public schools in the last state evaluation of that. And that was the school that I go to, Baltimore School for the Arts. And I personally love my school, but I do think that it is perhaps overly idealistic to use those star ratings as a metric of what is an improved school versus schools that were closed, especially because there are so few schools in our city that rank at a very high level. However, I would use that argument not as a reason to defend closing more schools, but rather as a bit of evidence in support of what Commissioner Esposito is saying, in that it might be wise for us to look at a moratorium on school closures until the overall standards of our school district are such that school closures would have a less profound impact on the individual students that are attending the schools that are being closed.
I appreciate that comment, Mr. Katsapi. Thank you. All right. That takes us to the end of our agenda today. I want to thank the public for your participation, and as well as my fellow commissioners and our staff who put together presentations and fielded questions from commissioners today. So coming up, our next meeting will be on April 18th. In particular, we will be covering policy IGE, which focuses on curriculum, and a new regulation focusing on media and library services. And then we'll be reviewing 3 compliance reports. So this is IHCAB, which is access to appropriate physical education, IKEA, excuse me, promotion and retention and grades K through 12. And then finally policy JIH, school administrative search and seizures. Thank you so much. We look forward to reconvening in April. Until then, be well.